Hi ladies. First off, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Pam Robbins, for those of you who don't know me, and I will be teaching your beginning patchwork quilting workshop that you signed up for. I'm also the owner of Purple Crayon, again, for those of you who don't know me, which I think most of you guys do, but in any case, thank you so much for signing up, and I thought I would take a few minutes just to go through all of the materials required for this workshop, because there's quite a lengthy list. And although they're not that difficult to find, I just didn't want you guys to be overwhelmed with what everything is. So bear with me, and I will go through the list item by item, and if you have any questions at the end of this, feel free to either shoot me an email at pam@purplecrayonavl.com or leave me a text message. You can actually use my personal cell phone number, which is 206-724-2096. Alrighty, let's get started. First of all, you will need the pattern, which looks something like this, and there's a link to it in your list of supplies, and you'll see that you can either get it as an electronic version that you can download, or you can get it as a hard copy that's already been made into a little booklet. I would recommend the hard copy only because if you're following this online, it's going to be hard to go back and forth for your screens between me and the pattern. But if that's the only way you can do it, that's totally fine, and you may not even need to reference it as during class, because I will be doing that for you. But anyway, that's up to you, and it's not very expensive. I think the one that's downloadable, I think is like $5, and the one that you have to buy is I think is like $8, something like that. So, but anyway, that's the first thing. Next, you'll need a sewing machine, which I have mine over here. I think you all know what a sewing machine is. I don't have to tell you about that, but do know that you just need a really basic sewing machine. Just as long as it can do a solid straight stitch, you're in good shape. You don't need any of those fancy buttons and whatnot. Next, you will need sewing machine needles. That's what these are. You'll see that I wrote down 80 by 20, which is actually the size of the needle. There are different size needles for different kinds of fabric, actually, and that is what's recommended if you are quilting. I guess it's a really good one to use for cotton materials. So I would recommend that, and I would recommend starting out with a new needle with this new project. People usually recommend that you do that if you can, if you have extra needles. So I would suggest that. You will also need a rotary cutter. This is a rotary cutter, and I put down a 45 millimeter, either Fiskars or Olfa cutter. This is an Olfa one. I've had this one for probably 30 years, and it still is in good shape. I do replace the blades, and actually I didn't mention the blade. I just realized it's not on your list, but when you buy one of these, it'll come with a blade. But you should have they say, a new blade for every project, again, just like a needle. I don't always do that. It just depends on how much I've used the previous blade. But you'll notice really quickly if you need a new blade, because it will start skipping as you're cutting if it's time to get another blade. But anyway, that's that. And 45 millimeters is the size. They do come in all different size. I think it's like the size of the wheel here. And you can get a much bigger, and you can get a much smaller. I certainly wouldn't recommend much smaller. And some people prefer the bigger ones if you're cutting a lot of material, like thick layers. But I think it can be cumbersome if you're not doing that, which we're not going to be doing in this. So 45 millimeters is your standard. You'll also need a pair of scissors. I have a pair of scissors right here. I do have a pair of dedicated, these that you'll see on one side it says fabric. I have two different pairs of scissors at the studio, and one of them is fabric and one of them is for paper and other things. And it's important to keep those scissors separate, because your scissors can get dull really quickly if you use them to cut paper and other stuff, and you want to make sure that they stay sharp for cutting fabric. You'll also need a cutting mat. You can't really see mine. Let's see. I move it down. There's my cutting mat. I personally have a 24 by 36 inch one. That's what I would recommend at a minimum that you have. I would not get one that's smaller. They do come in smaller sizes, but it's hard to keep all your fabric on it if you get it much smaller. And it's lovely to have a bigger one if you have space for a bigger one, but the bigger one also is not quite as portable. So 24 by 36 is a good one, a good size to sort of aim for. Let's see, you'll also need a transparent rotary ruler like this. This is the 24 by, what size did I say here? I'm reading off my cheat sheet here. 6 by 24, and that's what I use for the majority of my cutting. I have several other rulers, and you might amass a collection as well if you continue quilting. But that's the one that is kind of my workhorse, is that 6 by 24. And I also have, this is in the optional things, but since we're talking about rulers, I also have a square ruler, which is really nice for if you're trying to square off your squares, and I will show you how to do that when we start making some squares. And that also comes in different sizes. The one that I have is a 12.5 by 12.5. I also have a larger one that I think it's a 15 by 15 or something like that, that I use for t-shirt quilts. But anyway, if you have one of those, great. If you don't, no worries. You can get along fine without one of those for now. Let's see, straight pins. You'll also need straight pins. I did put in the notes here that you want long, thin ones with large heads. This is what I typically use. These are not really quilting pins. The quilting pins tend to be longer and sometimes flatter, and those are great if you have them and you want to spend the money for them. But if you don't, just generally just a sharp pin is what I would recommend. You'll need an iron and an ironing board. I do have that over here, but I'm not going to show it to you because I think you know what those are. You'll need a seam ripper. This is my seam ripper. And really important that you get a nice one that you like, because you're going to use this all the time. This particular one has, it's like a rubber top up here, and what it's kind of nice for is if you do this on top of your boo-boos, and it'll take out the little stitches that well, it won't take out the stitches, they have to be cut first, but the little pieces of thread, it removes that. So you want to make sure you have a seam ripper. Your thread is actually quite important. I would recommend, and most quilters will recommend, 100% cotton thread versus like a polyester or a poly cotton blend. That you also want something that's either a light tan or a light gray, something like that. You can pretty much use it for piecing any color fabric. It just blends nicely, so you don't see your stitches very much. So that's what I would recommend for that. Let's see, the batting. Here's my batting. This is what batting looks like. This is what goes in between your top layer of your quilt top, and your backing. It's pretty thin. You can see it's like the thickness of felt, basically. And I like 100% to use 100% cotton. This happens to be warm and neutral. I think it's what's called warm and neutral. And this is what I use for almost all of my, well, it is what I use for all of my wall quilts. It's just a good thickness. It's what I would, it's kind of, again, a workhorse. And I apologize for a little bit of noise here. I'm at the studio, so there's some people leaving right now. But anyway, the size you want is at least 41 by 52. It's called a quilt size, or a baby quilt size. You'll need that much for this particular quilt. You'll also want some temporary fabric adhesive or basting spray. This is nice for when you're assembling your quilt, your 3 layers. You can just spray it on, and the fabric sticks to itself, so you don't have to worry about pinning it, or basically people just usually pin it or baste it or something like that. If you have that basting spray, it makes it really nice and easy. Let's see, fabric. Okay. I have brought some sample fabric over here. The woman who made this particular pattern up decided she wanted to use white and teal and red. It's not my favorite color combination, but if that's what you like, that's totally fine. But basically, you want to have 3 different colors of fabric for your blocks, and the easiest thing would be to just get 3 separate fabrics. If you're trying to use up scraps for some reason, like I did in the picture that was on the workshop page, you can certainly piece together the quilts using several different kinds of material, but it definitely creates more of a challenge than if you just have 3. When you're picking your fabric, you want to make sure that you get 3 fabrics that are coordinating but contrasting. It's just going to make for a more interesting quilt, and it's going to make it easier to learn how to assemble your different quilt blocks. So for example, this is a good example of 3 different coordinating but contrasting colors of fabric. They certainly don't have to be purple. One could be purple, one could be green, and one could be yellow, or whatever kind of floats your boat with that. But you also, you'll notice in these, they don't have a lot of print to them. They don't have big print to them. They have a little tiny print to them, which is what you want. When you get into bigger prints, or what it's called directional prints, it makes it quite a bit more difficult to piece together. You have to pay attention to direction and whatnot. For example, this is a directional print where it's a line basically. So if you're making a quilt or making some blocks, if you have one block where the fabric is going this way and another block where it's going this way, you may like that look, but you have to be conscious that that's what you're creating, and that may be more than you want to do as a beginner quilter. The other thing is, this is like a fairly big pattern, and it could even be bigger. When it gets to be even bigger, like a big huge flower or something, when you're cutting it up into smaller pieces, you're going to get several different colors and looks in the different blocks where you're hoping to be more uniform. If you're only using, say, 3 different fabrics, and you want them to register as 3 different fabrics, not 10 different fabrics, because one block is made from this part of the flower and another block is made from this part of the flower, or whatever. So stay away from big prints. Let's see. I put down how much you need of each of those things. You'll also need a print or some fabric for your sashing and borders. And if I was doing this purple one, I found this other piece of material, which would be really nice for sashing, which is the stuff that goes in between the blocks, and then the borders, which is the fabric that would go around the blocks. So you can either go quite a bit lighter than your other fabrics that you've picked, or you can go quite a bit darker, but it's really important that you don't have a lot of print either. It's kind of understated in whatever you pick for your sashing and borders. And I've already told you to hold off on your backing fabric, because I don't know if you're going to end up doing 12 blocks or 9 blocks, and I don't want you having to waste money on buying more fabric than you need. So don't worry about that. Some other optional things that are on the list that I gave you, I already talked about that square quilting ruler. You also might want, this is a 1/4 inch quilting foot. This fits my particular machine. Everyone's machine has a different 1/4 inch foot, and what this does is, you can see there's like a little right there, that's where your needle goes in, and from there to the edge is exactly a 1/4 inch. So it makes making 1/4 inch seams, which is what you use when you're patchwork quilting, a lot easier. You have a little guide, so that's really nice to have, but again, not urgent, and we can figure out a way to make a 1/4 inch marking on your machine by using tape or something like that. So if you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, don't worry, we'll figure that out. I also had marked down something called Invisigrip. I don't know if these were actually Invisigrip little feet here, but you see this little plasticky looking foot. I have these on my rulers so that when I have them down and I'm pressing on them to cut against, they don't move. So that's what that Invisigrip does. It just, I think there's sheets of stuff you can get that you put underneath your rulers, and it'll keep them from slipping, which kind of makes your life easier. But again, it's not imperative that you have that. Quilting gloves, like these. These are really nice when you actually get to the part where you're quilting, which means making the stitching to hold all the layers together. If you are doing something that's called like free motion quilting, where you might have seen some beautiful designs made with thread that some quilters use to hold their quilts together, it's really important to have these, because this will keep your material in place when it's in the sewing machine. But we're going to be doing something that's called stitch in the ditch, which is a really easy way of quilting your 3 layers together. And you don't 100% need to use these, because you're still using what's called your dogs to feed the material through, so your material's not going all over the place. But it's still nice to have these, and I'll explain more about what stitch in the ditch and quilting all the stuff is later. And finally, a design wall. That's what I've got behind me here. It's basically a piece of felt, really, that fabric sticks to. So it's really nice if you are building and designing a quilt. You can stick up your different pieces of the quilt, and they'll stay on there without having to be pinned down and stuff. So it's really kind of a fun thing to have to hold your work together until it's all sewn together. But again, it's not imperative. If you don't have that, you just will just lay it out on a table and hope there's not a big wind that comes through your house. All right, I think that's it on the material list. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, again, pam@purplecrayonavl.com, or text or call me. My personal cell is fine, 206-724-2096. And I'm really excited to get going with this workshop, and I will look forward to playing with you in a few weeks. All right, thanks guys, bye-bye.